Chapter 6. A Gift and a Purchase. For a week the scene of the roundup lay within riding distance of the ranch house, and Madeline passed most of this time in the saddle, watching the strenuous labors of the vaqueros and the cowboys. She overestimated her strength and more than once had to be lifted from her horse. Stillwell's pleasure in her attendance gave place to concern. He tried to persuade her to stay away from the roundup, and Florence gave even more solicitation. Madeline, however, was not moved by their entreaties. She grasped only dimly the truth of what she was learning, something infinitely more than the roundup of the cattle by cowboys, and she was loath to lose an hour of her opportunity. Her brother looked out for her as much as his duties permitted, but for several days he never more once mentioned her growing fatigue and the strain of the excitement, or suggested that she had better go back to the house with Florence. Many times she felt the drawing power of his keen blue eyes upon her face, and at those moments she sensed more than brotherly regard. He was watching her and studying her, weighing her, and the conviction was vaguely disturbing. It was disquieting for Madeline to think that Alfred might have guessed her trouble. From time to time he brought cowboys to her and introduced them, and laughed and jested, and trying to make the ordeal less embarrassing for those men that were so little unused to women. Before the week was out, however, Alfred found occasion to tell her that it would be wiser for her to let the roundup go on without gracing it further with her presence. He said it laughingly. Nevertheless, he was serious. And when Madeline turned to him in surprise, he said bluntly, "I don't like the way Don Carlo follows you around. Bill's afraid that Nels or Ambrose or one of the cowboys will fall out with one of the Mexicans. They're itching for a chance. Of course, dear, it seems absurd to you, but it is true." Absurd it certainly was, yet it served to show Madeline how intensely occupied she had been with her own feelings, roused by the tumult and the toil of the roundup. She recalled that Don Carlos had been present to her, and that she had not liked his dark, striking face with his bold, prominent, glittering eyes and sinister lines. She had not liked his suave or sweet, insinuating voice, or his subtle manner, with its slow bows and gestures. She had thought he looked handsome and dashing on that magnificent horse. However, now that Alfred's word made her think, she recalled that whenever she had been in the field with the noble horse, with his silver-mounted saddle and dark rider, he had always been in her vicinity. "Don Carlo has been after Florence for a long time," said Alfred. "He's not a young man by any means. He's 50, Bill says, but you can seldom tell a Mexican's age by his looks. Don Carlo is well educated and a man we know very little about. Mexicans of his stamp don't regard women as we white men do. Now, my dear sister from New Orleans, I haven't much use for Don Carlos, but I wouldn't want Nels or Ambrose to make a wild throw with a rope and pull that Don off his horse. So if you could you stay up at the house there, please?" "Alfred, you're joking, teasing me," said Madeline. "No, I'm not," replied Alfred. "How about it, Flo?" Flo replied that the cowboys would, upon the slightest provocation, treat Don Carlos with less ceremony and gentleness than a rope steer. Old Bill Stillwell came up to be opportuned by Alfred regarding the conduct of cowboys on occasion, and he not only corroborated the assertion, but added emphasis and evidence of his own. "And, Miss Majesty," he concluded, "I reckon if Gene Stewart was riding for me, that grinning greaser would have had a bump in the dust before now." Madeline had been wavering between sobriety and laughter until Stillwell's mention of his ideal cowboy doing what he figured best. "I'm not convinced, but I'll surrender," she said. "You have some motive for driving me away. I'm sure that handsome Don Carlo is being unjustly suspected. But as I've seen little of cowboys' singular imagination and gallantry, I'll rather incline to fear their possibilities, so goodbye." Then she rode with Florence up the long gray slope to the ranch house. That night she suffered from excessive weariness, which she attributed more to the strange working of her mind than to riding and sitting upon her horse. Morning, however, found her in no disposition to rest. It was not activity that she craved, or excitement, or pleasure. It was an unerring instinct, rising clear from the thronging sensation of the last few days, that told her she was missing something in life. It could not have been love, for she loved brother, sister, parents, and friends. It could not have been consideration for the poor, the unfortunate, the helpless, that she had expressed her sympathy for those that by giving freely. It couldn't be from pleasure, or culture, or travel, society, wealth, position, or fame, for these had been hers all her life. Whatever this was, she was baffled, and had intentions of it, hoping that fading on the verge of realizations and haunting promises that were unfilled. Whatever it was, it remained hidden and unknown at home, and here in the West it began to allure and drive her to discovery. Therefore, she couldn't rest. She wanted to go and see. She no longer was chasing phantoms. It was a hunt of treasure that held aloof and intelligible at the substance of dreams. That morning she spoke a desire to visit the Mexican quarters laying at the base of the foothills. Florence protested that this was no place to take Madeline, but Madeline insisted, and it required only a few words and a persuading smile to win Florence over. From the porch, the clutter of the adobe houses added a picturesque touch of color in contrast to the waste of the gray valley. Near at hand, they proved the enchantment laid by distance. They were old and crumbling, broken down and squalid. A few goats climbed upon here or there, and a few mangy dogs barked an announcement for the visitors. And then a troop of half-naked, dirty, ragged children ran out. They were very shy, and at first retreated in fright. But kind words and smiles gained their confidence, and then they followed in a body, gathering a quota of new children at each home. Madeline at once conceived the idea of doing something to better the conditions of these poor Mexicans, and with this in mind she decided to have a look indoors. She fancied she might have been an apparition, judging from the effect her presence had upon the first woman she encountered. While Florence exercised the little Spanish she had command of, trying to get women to talk, Madeline looked upon the miserable little rooms, and there grew upon her a feeling of sadness, which increased as she passed from house to house. She had not believed such squalor could exist anywhere in America. The huts reeked with filth, vermin crawling all over the dirt floors. There was absolutely no evidence of water, and she believed what Florence told her, that these people never bathed. There was little evidence of labor. Idle men and women smoking cigarettes lolled about, some silent, others jabbering. They did not resent the visit of the American women, nor did they show hospitality. They appeared somewhat stupid. Disease was rampant in these houses, and when the doors were shut, there was no ventilation, and even with the doors open, Madeline felt choked and stifled. A powerful, penetrating odor prevailed the rooms that was less stifling than others, and this odor, Florence explained, came from a liquor that the Mexicans distilled from a cactus plant. Here, drunkenness was manifest, a terrible, inert drunkenness that made its victims death-like. Madeline could not extend her visit to the little mission house. She saw Padre, a starved, sad-faced man who, she instinctively felt, was good. She managed to mount her horse and ride up to the house, but once there she weakened, and Florence almost had to carry her indoors. She fought off a faintness only to succumb to it when alone in her room. Still, she did not entirely lose consciousness, and soon recovered to the extent that she did not require assistance. Upon the morning after the end of the roundup, when she went out onto the porch, her brother and Stillwell appeared to be arguing over the identity of a horse.
"Well, I reckon it's my old roan," said Stillwell, shading his eyes with his hands.
"Bill, if that ain't Stewart's horse, my eyes are going back on me," replied Al. "It's not the color nor the shape. The distance is too far to judge by that. It's the motion and the swinging of it."
"Al, maybe you're right, but there ain't no rider upon that horse. Flo, fetch me glasses."
Flo went into the house, while Madeline tried to discover the object of intention. Presently, far up the hollow, upon a foothill, she saw dust, and then the dark, moving figure of a horse. She was watching when Flo returned with the glass. Bill took a long look, adjusting the glasses carefully, and tried again.
"Well, I hate to admit me eyes are getting poor, but I guess I have to. That's Gene Stewart's horse, saddled and coming at a fast clip without a rider. It's amazingly strange, and some in keeping with other things concerning Gene."
"Give me the glass," said Al. "Yeah, I was right, Bill. The horse is not frightened. He's coming steadily. He's got something on his mind."
"That there's a trained hoss, Al. He has more sense than some men I know. Take a look with the glasses up the holler. See anybody up there?"
"No."
"Swing over to them there foothills where the trail leads. Higher up there, along that ridge where the rocks begin. You see anybody up there?"
"By job, Bill, there's two horses, but I can't make out much for dust. They're climbing fast. One horse gone among the rocks, and now the other one there's gone. What do you make of that?"
"Well, I can't make no more'n you, but I'll bet we know something right soon, for Gene's horse is coming faster as he nears the ranch."
The wide hollow sloping up into the foothills lay open to the unobstructed view, and less than half a mile distant Madeline saw the riderless horse coming along the white trail at a rapid canter. She watched him, recalling the circumstances under which she had first seen him, and then his wild flight through the dimly lit streets of El Cajon out into the black night. She thrilled again, and believed she would never think of that starry night adventure without a thrill. She watched the horse, and felt more than curious. A shrill, piercing whistle pealed in.
"Well, he's seen us, that's for sure," said Bill.
The horse neared the corrals and disappeared into a lane, then, breaking his gant again, thundering into the enclosure, and halted about 20 yards from where Stillwell was waiting for him. One look at him at close range in the clear light of day was enough for Madeline to award him with a blue ribbon over all horses, even her prize-winning white stockings. The cowboy's great steed was no lithe, slender-bodied Mustang. He was a charger, almost tremendous of build, with a black coat faintly molded into gray, and it shone like polished glass in the sun. Evidently he had been carefully dressed down for this occasion, for there was no dust upon him, nor a kink in his beautiful mane, nor a mark upon his glossy hide.
"Come here, you son of a gun," said Stillwell.
The horse dropped his head and snorted, and came obediently up to him. He was neither shy nor wild. He poked a friendly nose at Stillwell, then looked at Al, and then the women. Unhooking the stirrups from the pommel, Stillwell let them fall and began to search the saddle for something which he might evidently expect to find. Presently, from somewhere along the trappings, he produced a folded paper, and after scrutinizing upon it, he handed it over to Al.
"Addressed to you. I'll bet you 2 bits I know what's in it," he said.
Al unfolded the letter, read it, and then looked at Stillwell. "Bill, you're a pretty good guesser. Gene's made for the border. He sent the horse by somebody, no names mentioned, and wants my sister to have him if she'll accept."
"Any word of Danny Maines?"
asked the rancher.
"Not a word. That's too bad. Gene knowed about Danny, if anyone would. But he's a closed-mouthed cuss. So he's sure hitting for Mexico. Wonder if Danny's going too. Well, there's 2 of the best cowmen I ever seen, and I'm sorry to see 'em down there."
With that, he bowed his head and grumbled to himself and went into the house. Alfred lifted the reins over the head of the horses and led him to Madeline, and slipped the knot over her arm, and placed the letter in her hand. "Majesty, I'd accept the horse," he said. "Stewart's only a cowboy now, and tough as any I've known, but he comes of good family. He was a college man and a gentleman once. He went to the bad out here, as so many fellows do, near as I almost did. Then he had told me about his sister and mother. He cares a great deal for them. I think he has been a source of unhappiness for them. It was mostly when he was reminded of this in some way he'd go and get drunk. I have always stuck to him, and I would do so yet if I had the chance. You can see, Bill, he's broken-hearted about Danny Maines and Stewart. I think he'd rather hope to get good news. There's not much chance of them coming back now, at least not in the case of Stewart. This giving up his horse means he's going to be joining the rebel folks across the border. What I wouldn't give to see that cowboy break loose of that bunch of greasers. Damn the luck. Beg your pardon, Majesty, but I'm upset too. Sorry about Stewart. I liked him pretty well before he thrashed that coyote of Sheriff Pat Hawes, and afterwards I guess I like him even more. You read the letter, sister, and accept the horse." In silence, Madeline bent her gaze from her brother's face to the letter. "Friend Al, I'm sending my horse down to you because I'm going away and haven't the nerve to take him where he'd get hurt or fall into strange hands. If you think it's all right, give him to your sister with my respects. But if you don't like the idea, Al, or if she won't have him, then you can have him. I'm not forgetting your kindness to me, even if I've never shown it. And I, Al, my horse has never felt a quirt or a spur, and I'd like to think you'd never hurt him. I'm hoping your sister will take him. She'll be good for him, and she can afford to take care of him. And while I'm waiting to be plugged by some greaser bullet, if I happen to have a picture in mind of how she'll look upon my horse, why, man, it's not going to make any difference to you. She needn't ever know. Between you and me, Al, don't let her or Flo ride over to Don Carlo's way. If I had time, I could tell you something about that slick greaser. And tell your sister, if there's ever any reason for her to run away from anyone when she's up on that roan, just let her lean over and yell in his ear, and she'll find herself riding the wind. So long, Gene Stewart." Madeline thoughtfully folded the letter and murmured, "How he must love his horse." "Well, I should say so," replied Alfred. "Flo will tell you. She's the only person Gene's ever let ride that horse, unless, as Belle thinks, that little Mexican girl Bonita that rode him out of El Cajon the other night. Well, sister mine, how about it? Will you accept the horse?" Of course, and very happy indeed I am to get him. Hal, you said, I think, that Mr. Stewart named him after me. Saw my nickname in the New York paper? Yep. Well, I'll not change his name, but, Al, how shall I ever climb upon him? He's taller than I am. What a giant of a horse! Look at him. I really believe he understood what I said. Al, did you ever see such a splendid head and beautiful eyes? They're so large and dark and soft and almost human. Oh, I'm a fickle woman, for I'm forgetting white stockings, though. I'll gamble he'll make you forget any other horse, Al said. You'll have to get on him from the porch. As Madeline was not dressed for saddle, she did not attempt to mount. Come, Majesty. How strange it sounds. We must get acquainted. You have now a new owner, a very severe young woman who demands loyalty from you and obedience, and some day after a decent period she'll expect love. Madeline led the horse to and fro, and with delight she appreciated his gentleness. She discovered that he did not need to be led. He came at her call and followed her like a pet dog, rubbed his black muzzle against her. Sometime in the turns of their walk he lifted his head with ears forward, looked up the trail by which he came and into the foothills. He was looking over the range. Somebody was calling to him, perhaps, from beyond the mountains. Madeline liked him the better for that memory, and pitied the wayward cowboy who had parted with his only possession that he loved the most. That afternoon, when Alfred lifted Madeline to the back of the big roan, she felt high in the air. We'll have to run out to the mesa, said her brother as he mounted. Keep a tight rein on him and ease up when you want to go faster. But don't be yelling in his ear until you want Florence and me to see you disappear over the horizon. He trotted out of the yard, down by the corral, and came out to the edge of a gray open flat that stretched several miles to the slope of a mesa. Florence led, and Madeline saw that she rode like a cowboy. Alfred drew on to her side, leaving Madeline to the rear. And then the leading horses broke into a gallop. They wanted to run, and Madeline felt with a thrill that she would be hardly able to keep Majesty from running, even if she wanted to. He saw it on the tight bridle as the others drew away and broke from pace to a gallop. Then Florence put her horse into a run, and Alfred turned and called to Madeline to come along. This will never do. They're running away from us, said Madeline, and she eased up her hold on the bridle. Something happened beneath her just then, and she did not know at first exactly what. As much as she wanted to be on horseback, she had never ridden at a running gait. In New York it was not safe. So when Majesty lowered and stretched and changed to the stiff galloping gallop for a smooth, wonderful gliding run, it required Madeline some moments to realize what was happening. It did not take long for her to see the distance diminish between her and her companions. Still, they had gotten a goodly start and were far advanced. She felt the steady, even rush of the wind. It amazed her to find how easily and comfortable she kept to the saddle. The experience was new. The one fault she had, therefore, found with riding was the violent shake-up. In this instance she experienced nothing of that kind, no strain, no necessity to hold on with a desperate awareness of work. She never felt the wind in her face, the whip of the horse's mane, the buoyant, level spring of a running gait. It thrilled her, exhilarated her, and fired her blood. Suddenly she found herself alive. Throbbing and inspired by what she knew not, she loosened the bridle and leaned forward. She cried, "Run, you splendid fellow, run!" She heard from beneath her a quick, sudden, clattering roar of hoofs, and she swayed back with the wonderfully swift increase of Majesty's speed. The wind stung her face, howled in her ears, and tore at her hair. The gray plain swept by on each side, and in front it seemed to be waving towards her. In her blurred sight, Florence and Albert appeared to be coming back, but she saw presently, upon nearer view, that Majesty was overhauling the other horses and was going to be passing them. Indeed, he did pass them, shot by so as almost to make them appear almost standing still. And as he ran on, not breaking gait, till he reached the steep side of the mesa, where he slowed down and stopped. "Wonderful!" exclaimed Madeline, and she was all in a blaze, and every muscle and nerve of her body tingled and quivered. Her hands, as she endeavored to put up the loosening strands of her hair, trembled and failed with their accustomed dexterity. Then she faced about, waited for her companions. Alfred reached her first, laughing and delighted, yet a little anxious. "Boy, can't he run? Did he bolt on you?" "No, I called in his ear," replied Madeline. "So that was it. That's the woman of you, the forbidden fruit. Flo said she'd do it the minute she was upon him. Majesty, you can ride. See if Flo doesn't say so." The Western girl came up, and then with her pleasure bright in her face. "Sure was great to see you. How your hair burned in the wind. Al, she can sure ride. I'm so glad. I was a little afraid in that horse. Isn't he grand? Can't he run?" Alfred led the way up the steep zigzag trail to the top of the mesa. Madeline saw a beautiful flat surface of short grass, level as a floor. She uttered a small cry of wonder and enthusiasm. "Al, what a place for golf! This would be the finest links in the world." "Well, I thought of that myself," he replied. "The only trouble would be, could anyone stop looking at the scenery long enough to hit a ball? Take a look at that." And then it seemed that Madeline was confronted by a spectacle too sublime and terrible for her gaze. The immensity of this red-ridged, deep-gulfed world descended by distances that refused to be grasped, and they awed her and gave her shock. "Once, Majesty, when I first came west, I was down and out, determined to end it all," said Alfred, "and I happened to climb up here and look down from a lonely place to die. And when I saw that, I changed my mind." Madeline was silent. She remained so during the ride around the rim of the mesa and down the steep trail. This time Alfred and Florence failed to tempt her into a race. She had been awestruck. She had been confounded. She recovered slowly without divining exactly what she had come over her. She reached the ranch house far behind her companions, and at supper time was unusually thoughtful. Later, when they assembled on the porch to watch the sunset, Stillwell's humorous complaining inspired the inception of an idea which flashed up in her mind swift as lightning. And then, by listening sympathetically, she encouraged him to recite the troubles of a poor cattleman. They were many, and long, and interesting, and rather numbing to the life of her inspired idea. "Mr. Stillwell, could ranching here on large scale, with up-to-date methods be made, well, not profitably exactly, but to pay to run without loss?" she asked, determined to kill her newborn idea at birth, or else give it breath and hope of life.
"Well, I reckon it could," he replied with a short laugh. "It'd sure be a money-maker. Why, with all my bad luck and equipment, I've lived pretty well and paid my debts, and haven't really lost any money except for the original outlay. I reckon that there's sunk for good."
"Would you sell, if someone would pay your price?"
"Miss Majesty, I'd jump at the chance. Yet somehow I'd hate to leave her. I'd just be fool enough to go sink the money into another ranch."
"Would Don Carlos and those other Mexicans sell?"
"Oh, they sure would. The Don's been after me for years, wanting to sell that old rancho of his, and these herders in the valley with their stray cattle, they'd fall dead at sight of a little money."
"Please tell me, Mr. Stillwell, exactly what would you do here if you had unlimited means?" went on Madeline.
"Good Lord!" ejected the rancher,
and stared as he dropped his pipe. Then, with his clumsy, huge fingers, he relit it and took a few long puffs, and puffed great clouds of smoke. Then, squared around, hands upon his knees, he looked at Madeline with piercing intensity. His hard face began to relax and soften and wrinkle into a smile.
"Well, Miss Majesty, it just makes my old heart warm up to think of such a thing. I dreamed a lot when I first come here what I'd do if I had unlimited money. Well, you listen. First, I'd buy out Don Carlos and them greasers, and I'd give a job to every good cowboy in the country. I'd make them prosper as I prospered myself. I'd buy all the good horses on the ranges. I'd fence 20,000 acres of good grazing. I'd drill for water in the valley. I'd pipe water down from the mountains. I'd dam up that draw out there, a mile-long dam from hill to hill. It'd make me a big old lake, and having an eye for beauty, I'd plant cottonwoods around it, fill that lake full of fish. I'd put in the biggest field of alfalfa in the southwest, and I'd plant fruit trees and gardens. I'd tear down them old corrals and barns and bunkhouses and build new ones. I'd put in grass and flowers all around and bring young pine trees down from the mountains. And then, when all that was done, I'd sit in my chair and smoke and watch the cattle stringing out for water and strangling back into the valley. And I'd see the cowboys riding easy, hearing them singing in their bunks. And that red sun out there wouldn't set on a happier man in the world than old Bill Stillwell, that's the old cattleman."
Madeline thanked the rancher, and then rather abruptly retired to her room, where she felt no restraint to hide the force of that wonderful idea, now grown full and tenacious and alluring. Upon the next day, late in the afternoon, she asked Alfred if it'd be safe for her to ride out to the mesa. "I'll go with you," he said gaily. "Dear fellow, I want to go alone," she replied.
"Oh,"
Alfred exclaimed, suddenly serious. He gave her just a quick glance and then turned away. "Well, go ahead. I think it's safe enough. I'll make it safe by sitting here with my glasses and keeping an eye out for you. Be careful coming down the trail. Let the horse pick his way. That's about it." She rode Majesty across the wide flat and up the zigzag trail across the beautiful grassy level to the far rim of the mesa, and not till then did she lift her eyes to face the southwest. Madeline looked from Grey Valley to her feet to the blue Sierra Madres, gold-tipped in the evening sun. Her vision embraced in that glance distance, depth, and glory hitherto unrevealed to her. The Grey Valley sloped and widened to the black sentinel Chilhas, and beyond was lost in the vast sweep of earth, reddening down to the west, where a golden blaze lifted the dark, rugged mountains into bold relief. The scene was infinite beauty, but after Madeline's first sweep, all-embracing flash of enraptured eyes, thought of beauty passed away. In that darkened desert there was something illimitable. Madeline saw the hollow of a stupendous hand. She felt the mighty hold upon her heart, and out of the endless space, out of silence and desolation and mystery and age, came slow, changing colored shadows, phantoms of peace, and they whispered to Madeline. They whispered that it'd be a great, grim, immutable earth, that time was eternity, that life was fleeting. They whispered for her to be a woman, to love someone before it was too late, to love anyone, everyone, to realize the need of work, and in doing it, to find happiness. She rode back across the mesa and down the trail, and once more upon the flat she called to the horse and had him run. His spirit seemed to race with hers. The wind of his speed blew her hair from its fastenings, and when he thundered to a halt at the porch steps, Madeline, breathless and disheveled, alighted with the mass of her hair tumbling about her. Alfred met her, and with his exclamation and Florence's rampant eyes shining in her face, and Stillwell's speechlessness made her self-conscious. Laughing, she tried to put up the mess of her hair. "I must look a fright," she said with a pant.
"Well, you can say what you like," replied the old cattleman, "but I know what I think."
Madeline strove to attain calmness.
"My hat and my comb went on the wind, I thought. I thought my hair would go too. There is an evening star."
Then she gave up trying to be calm, and likewise fastening up her hair, which fell again to a golden mess.
"Mr. Stillwell," she began,
and paused, strangely aware of a hurried note, a deeper ring in her voice.
"Mr. Stillwell, I want to buy your ranch and to engage you as my superintendent. I want to buy Don Carlos Ranch and other properties to the extent, say, 50,000 acres. I want you to buy horses and cattle, in short, to make all those improvements which you said you so longed to dream of. And then I have ideas of my own, in the development of which I must also ask your advice and Alfred's. I intend to better the conditions of those poor Mexicans in the valley. I intend to make life a little more worth living for them and for the cowboys of this range. Tomorrow we'll talk it over and plan out the business details."
Madeline turned from the huge, ever-widening smile that beamed down upon her and held out her hand to her brother.
"Alfred, strange is it not, my coming out to you? Don't smile. I hope I found myself, my work, my happiness, here under the light of that western star."
End of chapter 6.